Good morning, church. This morning's reading comes from 1 Samuel chapter 11. It's halfway through your scripture journals. It's also going to be on the screen. Let's receive God's word for us all today. Then Nahash, the Ammonite, went up and besieged Jabesh Gilead, and all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, "Make a treaty with us, and we will serve you." But Nahash the Ammonite said to them, "On this condition I will make a treaty with you, that I gouge out all your right eyes and thus bring disgrace on all Israel." The elders of Jabesh said to him, "Give us 7 days' respite, that we may send messengers through all the territory of Israel. Then, if there is no one to save us, we will give ourselves up to you." When the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, they reported the matter in the ears of the people, and the people wept aloud. Now behold, Saul was coming in from the field behind the oxen, and Saul said, "What's wrong with the people, that they are weeping?" So they told him the news of the men of Jabesh, and the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled. He took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces and sent them throughout the territory of Israel by the hand of messengers, saying, "Whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen." Then the dread of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out as one man. When he mustered them at Bezek, the people of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. And they said to the messengers who had come, "Thus shall you say to the men of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow by the time the sun is hot, you shall have salvation." When the messengers came and told the men of Jabesh, they were glad. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, "Tomorrow we will give ourselves up to you, and you may do to us whatever seems good to you." And the next day Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp in the morning watch and struck down the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. Then the people said to Samuel, "Who is it that said, 'Shall Saul reign over us?' Bring the men that we may put them to death." But Saul said, "Not a man shall be put to death this day, for today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel." Then Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal, and there renew the kingdom." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they sacrificed peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. God's word for all of us, God's people. You can have a seat. Happy Mother's Day. So today we have an ancient Near East warlord, threats of eye gouging, spirit possession, a rousing call to arms, and a miraculous national unity. We've got a heroic military rescue executed by a farm boy who, as far as we know, has never fought a day in his whole life, leading an army who's never fought together as one. This feels more like a Michael Bay movie than Mother's Day sermon, but this is where we are in the story, so sorry, moms. The good news is God will have a word for all of us. But speaking of moms, this passage actually reminded me of a story that my mom loves to tell about me. And I don't remember it. I was 4 years old, but it still manages to embarrass me. So let me tell you. So I was 4 years old. My younger brother Ben was just 2. We were at Burger King, standing in line, awaiting to order our lunch. And so my mom's standing behind us. The 2 of us are in front. I'm holding my younger brother's hand, and we slowly boldly approach the counter to place our order. And there at the counter, there's this young 17-year-old, tall, kind of goofy guy who is taking orders. And so we walk up, and I'm sure he says, "Can I help you?" And I just said, "Are you the king?" I love you, Mom. Even though I don't remember being there, that story taught me something very important that I still think is applicable, especially today, and that is that wearing a crown doesn't necessarily make you a king. And when we look at Saul, at this point in the story, we're supposed to ask, are you the king? Last week we saw him get the anointing by God's prophet, an announcement to God's people, but he doesn't seem like his heart is really in it. Is he actually the king? Is he sovereign? Is he? So if you haven't been here in recent weeks, I definitely encourage you to back up this week, at least to chapter 8. Listen to the previous sermons, because that's where we pick up on Saul's story. But I will give us some Cliff's Notes to make sure we're all on the same page today. Back in chapter 8, the elders of Israel go to Samuel, their prophet, and they ask for a king like the nations. Their motive was that we may also be like the nations, that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And Samuel, the latest in a long line of prophets and judges, he wasn't happy about the request, but God had rescued his people from Egypt, kept them through the wilderness over 40 years, brought them into the land flowing with milk and honey, and all he sought from them was a dedicated relationship. He wanted an exclusive relationship that would have him be their God and they would be his particular set-apart people. Devotion, commitment, appreciation. But they didn't really want God as their king. They didn't want to be a particular people. They wanted to be a popular people. They wanted to be a people like the other people. God tells Samuel in essence, hey, it's not you, it's me they're rejecting. He tells Samuel to give them what they want, a king like the nations. And God selects a tall, maybe dark and handsome shepherd boy from Gibeah named Saul. Last week, Don covered the somewhat confusing story of his trajectory from anonymity to receiving the crown. He gets anointed in secret with Saul, and then he gets 3 custom-made signs that are supposed to confirm this is God, this is for real. He gets those signs. He's supposed to respond appropriately, but instead, he just goes home. It's like he ghosts Samuel and he tries to hide from God. Frustrated, Samuel assembles the 12 tribes and exposes Saul as the new king in dramatic fashion. You remember this? So he kind of plays like he's casting lots, like he's randomly selecting the new king. And he goes from the 12 tribes down to 1 tribe, the tribe of Benjamin. And then he goes to the clan of the Matrites. And then he goes to the house of Kish. And then he goes to the firstborn son of Saul. Except Saul's nowhere to be found. Saul's hiding on the outskirts. So this is a confusing kind of anticlimactic moment. I mean, Israel has clamored for the king, and now they have him. Long live the king. But he's like hiding. Is this really the guy? And then everybody just goes home, including Saul, and it's as if nothing has really happened. It's like calling a huge press conference, getting all the media outlets in the room, and then kind of having nothing to share. It's really a weird moment. And then that chapter ends with this ominous cliffhanger. But some worthless fellow said, how can this man save us? And so chapter 11 really begins with that question. And an enemy invasion occurs on one of the young kingdom's sovereign territories. So this passage, this story, gives us an answer to that question. How can this man save his people? But the answer given isn't what it seems on the surface. So we've got to get into the story. We begin in the setting of Jabesh Gilead. It's a small town on the east side of the 12 tribes. Most of us read our Bibles and skim over these funny foreign places, and that's about as close as we get, but we really kind of have to go there in order to understand what's happening here. Now, this is a map. Sorry, it probably could be a little bit easier to see, but you'll be able to track with me in a second. For those of you that are going through the Bible recap chronological reading plan, hopefully this will be a bit of a recap for you. Through Moses, God led his people, the Hebrews, out of slavery in Egypt into the wilderness of Sinai to do some soul searching and sanctifying over the course of like 40 years. Eventually, it was time to go into the promised land. On the way in, some of the 12 tribes, Reuben, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh, wanted some of the fertile lands to the east of the Jordan River, lands not originally included in God's promised land. God's original intent was to have everybody be on the left-hand side of the Jordan to the west. Let's see, they wanted a different land, even though he was already giving them a perfectly good promised land. Remember the land flowing with milk and honey. So this is a little bit kind of like when God has given them a king and they're like, no, we want a real king. We want a human king. It's rejecting God and his better plan and trying to get some sort of a counterfeit. So on the map, the purple up at the top, it's the eastern inheritance of the tribe of Manasseh. In Jabesh, you probably can't really see it well, but there's this little yellow box. It's down at the bottom of the purple. That's Jabesh Gilead. Now this purple is the half tribe of the 2.5 Transjordanian tribes, the tribes across the River Jordan. So you can think of this half tribe as half-hearted in devotion to Yahweh and in devotion to the rest of Israel. They were told not to affiliate with the locals, but to drive them out and destroy their rival idols. Okay, and you read in Joshua that yet the people of Manasseh could not take possession of the cities, but the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in the land. Now, when the people of Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not utterly drive them out. And this fraternizing with the locals and a shared border with the very people that God commanded them to drive out jeopardized the security of the half-tribe. This was like the wild, wild east. But not only were they uncommitted to Yahweh, they were unsupportive of the rest of Israel, their brothers and sisters. Back in Judges 21, the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead were the sole holdouts, the no-shows, when the rest of the 11 tribes were summoned together to discipline the wayward tribe of Benjamin. There's more to the story that we'll come back to, but needless to say, the folks of Jabesh had a soiled reputation amongst their own people as a kind of rebellious outpost on the outskirts of the unofficial land of God's people. And that's where we meet Nahash. Nahash was a warlord of the east. He was a people also on that side of the Jordan. The Ammonites were descendants of Lot, who you might remember was Abraham's cousin who had a brief cameo in Genesis. So he was with the good guys, but then he basically left, and he ends up being an outsider. And the tribes that come from him are enemies, they're outsiders. And so when you hear the Ammonites, think of modern day Amman, Jordan, because that's pretty much where they set up shop. So Nahash translates serpent into Hebrew. And so it's not great connotations for the people of Yahweh. Back to Genesis 3, you remember that's where the fall starts. So he would have been understood by the original Hebrew audience not just to be a regional bad guy, but a symbolic distant relative of the serpent in the garden. This is an agent of chaos, of anti-creation. He's an operative against Yahweh. And this is the first time that we hear of Nahash, but it won't be the last. He shows up a few times when we get to King David. But it's hard to know if this was a particular man's name that we see all the way into the future, or if this is like some sort of a title for any king of the Ammonites. It's a little bit like, I don't know, like someone who says, my name is Snake versus Jake the Snake, like, kind of a nickname. So, but for this Nahash, we know a little bit more about this particular leader of the Ammonites from an extra paragraph contained in one of the Dead Sea Scrolls that's not included in our Bibles. In fact, some of your Bibles may actually have a little aside there. And it reads this: Now Nahash, king of the Ammonites, had been oppressing the Gadites and the Reubenites, the other two tribes on the east side, grievously, gouging out the right eye of each of them and allowing Israel no deliverer. No men of the Israelites who were across the Jordan remained, whose right eye Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, had not gouged out. But 7,000 men had escaped from the Ammonites and entered into Jabesh Gilead. So the other two tribes, they were attacked by Nahash. They ran up to the purple area, and they were hiding out in this little town, Jabesh Gilead. So this guy had a reputation in the land, a bad dude. You don't want to cross Nahash. Don't play with him, he'll gouge your eye out. According to this extra biblical source, the city of Jabesh was housing refugees from the other Transjordanian tribes who had fled Nahash's wrath. These refugees likely shared with their hosts what a monster this guy was. So when he shows up, sensing imminent defeat, the elders of Jabesh quickly fly up the white flag. They say, make a treaty with us, which literally means cut a covenant with us. And this was a really quick compromise because they had already, as Israel, cut a covenant with the God who had brought them out of Egypt. So I have to imagine Nahash is actually kind of amused with how quickly he got the tap out. He didn't have to do anything. All he does is show up on the front door and they're like, we surrender, we submit. So he agrees with the treaty on one condition: the gouging out of each of the right eyes of all the men of Jabesh. Now this sounds like, I don't know, psychopath, like what's going on here? But there's actually some strategy here as well. In the ancient Near East, the right eye was regarded as the dominant eye. Sorry, lefties. It's just like the right hand, the right foot. And in battle, your right eye was used for aiming. And when shielding a man, the right eyes would allow the soldier to see. So to lose the right eye would make it impossible to use both the shield and the sword, leaving one without either the ability to fight or to defend. It would also eliminate depth perception, which is kind of an important thing when you're in battle. So gouging out the right eye effectively retires a warrior. Nahash wanted to half-blind his conquered subjects to ensure submission. Half-blind men could still farm, but they couldn't fight back, a helpless cash cow. So Nahash wanted to blind, enslave, and disgrace, which is not uncommon amongst serpents who were enemies. This is the serpent's price for peace. But then why does he give this conquered people, why does he give them 7 days to send for help? I think there's kind of two obvious reasons. Number one is he feels pretty good about his odds. He feels pretty good about himself. He's got a lot of arrogance, a lot of pride, because he has a lot of power and a lot of victories. And so he's enjoyed influence in the form of fear. But the other thing that I think is a compelling reason for why he lets them go is because this is a PR tactic. Think about it. He could sit back and let his conquered people scatter like ants among all of Israel, spreading the news about this dread, about this barbarian. And after a week, he'd have his victory and more publicity. This is like a win-win. It's like ancient Near East social media. And it worked. The word spread throughout the land. It gets to Gibeah. And it makes it to where Saul had gone home to his family farm, to resume his former life, the good old days before God had spoken. So we saw last week that Saul's hiding from his calling, trying to act as if Yahweh hadn't called him to be king of Israel. And it feels a little bit like Jonah. Instead of him, sailing to the other side of the world, he goes home and basically pretends like what had happened the previous week just didn't happen. But one day he comes home from the fields and seeing his neighbors weeping and wants to know, hey, what's going on? And as Don hinted at last week, God is a God of second chances. And today Saul would have his second chance. And so we read in verse 6, the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled. So the last time the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul, this is not the first time, he rushed to join the merry band of prophets. But then he resisted the Spirit. I mean, he got God's Spirit, but then he's like, thanks, but no thanks, and he goes home. He didn't do what his hand found for him to do. He didn't, go all judge on the assembled garrison of the Philistines. He just goes home. But this time is different. And I want to quickly point out that the word used for the spirit that rushes Saul isn't the same one that Samuel had promised in the previous chapter. Back in chapter 10, Samuel told Saul that when he finds the merry band of prophets, the Spirit of the Lord will rush upon you. But then what happens in chapter 10, verse 10, and again in 11:6, is that the Spirit of God shows up instead. The Spirit of the Lord, Yahweh, versus the Spirit of God, Elohim. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, okay, word nerd, who cares? Like, what's the difference? The difference between these words will themselves tell part of the story. Yahweh is the covenant name that God gives to Moses to tell Pharaoh when asked about who sent him. Remember? I am that I am, Yahweh. This is the precious covenant name of God that was so revered that his people didn't actually utter it audibly out of reverence. And when they wrote it, they took out the vowels, or they just simply said, the Lord. This is a special, personal covenant name of God. Elohim, also cool, but very, very different. El would have been a generic Semitic shorthand way of talking about God. God, like all the people in the ancient Near East would say El and recognize it as just some generic God. Elohim is actually the plural form, and it's first used in Genesis 1, and it could best be understood as the God of creation or God of gods, which is a grand title, but compared to Yahweh, it lacks intimacy, connection, significance for God's chosen people. So to be clear, we're not talking about two different spirits. Same spirit, same God. But the title used here, to rush Saul, is impersonal and functional, not intimate and familiar. And the pivot between these two titles can't be chance, can't be arbitrary. Throughout the Old Testament, several chosen people, many or not most of them are judges, are said to have the Spirit of the Lord, Yahweh, rush upon them for a special mission resulting in victory. It's like they become a champion. Only one other time in the Bible does the phrase, the Spirit of God, Elohim, rush upon someone. And that's when God overtook and manipulated the prophet Balaam. Now, if you remember, Balaam is an outsider. And actually, he's not just an outsider, he's an enemy of God. But despite his adversarial position towards God, Yahweh forced his hand, or literally opened his mouth, to speak blessing on Israel. Now, that's the only other time that this phrase is used, when God uses a non-covenant person to accomplish his covenant work, almost like a puppeteer, a ventriloquist. The fact that Saul gets rushed by the Spirit of God for this assignment feels at best like a demotion, or more likely, a sign that Saul's heart isn't really all in it for Yahweh. Saul has been appointed by God to be Israel's first king, but he's a man far from God's own heart. He seems like his heart isn't really in God's covenant people. But the Spirit of God isn't hampered by half-heartedness or cold-heartedness or twisted hearts. The Spirit's going to do what the Spirit's going to do. God will have his way regardless of man's resistance. And with Saul, this is more like the Spirit picking up a tool, not empowering a champion. But this time Saul doesn't run. He doesn't hide. This time the verse says Saul got very, very angry. He seemingly goes berserk and butchers the oxen that he's with. And those of you animal lovers are like, oh, Saul, not the livestock. But this isn't just an impassioned response of anger. This is a purposeful authorship of the Spirit behind this action, because this is not the first time that we've seen an animal cut up into 12 pieces and sent out to the 12 tribes. Back in Judges 19, I told you we'd come back, we learned that a horrific incident of a Levite traveling through Gibeah, where Saul's from, with his concubine. And while spending the night in town, a mob of Benjaminites, the tribe that Saul belongs to, seeks to attack and abuse the Levite, resulting in his concubine being abused all night and murdered. You should kind of have maybe some echoes of Sodom and Gomorrah here. The Levite then cuts her body into pieces and sends them throughout Israel, prompting shock and outrage. All of the 11 other tribes and peoples muster and show out against Benjamin, except for the folks in, you guessed it, Jabesh Gilead. They're the lone holdouts. They don't show up. They don't stand with their countrymen, their brothers and sisters. Now, this was a dark, dark stain in Israel's history. And now a generation later, we have Saul, himself a Benjaminite, from the city of Gibeah, two negatives, who now cuts up his oxen into 12 pieces and sends them to the 12 tribes with an accompanying message. Whoever does not come out for Saul, the king, or Samuel, the prophet or priest, so shall it be done to his oxen. This is almost like the Spirit of God is revisiting this national memory of shame and rebellion and disunity and rallying the 12 tribes all this time to assemble, and this time to fight together as one to save the descendants of the very inhabitants who refused to fight in the previous generation. What a crazy redemptive web the Spirit is weaving here. And so Saul responds appropriately here, as if he had the choice. And it seems like all of God's people respond appropriately here as well. It says that the dread of the Lord fell upon the people and they came out as one man. I think the takeaway here is that the Spirit working through the king results in the Spirit working through the kingdom. This is the way it should be, but it's not because Saul is so devoted, because the Spirit won't be thwarted. And you might be wondering about those numbers, 300,000 men of Israel and 30,000 men of Judah in the muster report. It's not particularly important for this rescue mission. I think it's actually a little bit of a foreshadowing that even in the earliest days of the monarchy, at some point, we're going to have a divided kingdom here. It's another reminder that when God gives people what they want, that's not what he wants, like land outside the promise or a king other than him. It's often not what they need. And left to our own devices, we make really poor choices. And then we live with the consequences so that God can be vindicated, so that he can demonstrate his goodness and faithfulness and superiority to save. And we remember, we should have just listened to him in the first place. We won't go into detail on the rescue mission. The good guys win, which isn't a surprise when the Spirit is involved. God's Spirit unites his divided people as one man. And when that happens, the enemy is divided and conquered and separated so that no two are still together. So we get to the end of the story, and on the surface, it seems like Saul comes out smelling like a bouquet of roses on Mother's Day. I did it. I tied it in there. He's filled with the Spirit of God and righteous anger. He assembles the 12 tribes to fight as one man. He defeats the serpent Nahash and sends the enemy scattering. He shows mercy towards the rabble-rousers, and he even gives God the credit for the victory. He's doing everything right. So are we supposed to be like Saul? Like, is that the point of the story? What's really going on here? Some of you may know this word. For those of you that don't, I'm going to teach you a new word today. Soteriology came up in our covenant class this week, and it is a combination of a couple of Greek phrases. Soter means savior, soteria or soteria, the salvation, and then ology, the study of. So this is the study of all things related to salvation. It covers subjects like redemption, justification, atonement, grace. But basically it answers some straightforward questions. Who needs to be saved? What do they need to be saved from? Who's going to do the saving? How are they going to do it? And then what's the correlation between the one who is saving and the one who's being saved? Is it all the Savior, or do we have a part to play in it? That's where we get the predestination, free will. And so when you see a question like, how can this man save us? It feels like a question of soteriology, which is great. Because if you're a follower of Jesus, this is you. Like, you don't really get a pass on this. This is not just for scholars or seminarians. This is for anybody that is a Christian. Your life depends on it. And I would say, even if you're not a Christian, it's still not possible not to ask these questions and have practical, functional answers, even if they don't have anything to do with Jesus or Christianity. You don't have to be a scholar, but we all have to do some weighing of these questions. Now, these worthless men are not asking, how can this man save us, from an academic curiosity. They're not wanting to know the plan for salvation here. And in fact, truth be told, they're not really asking a question at all, but rather making a statement. Better not call Saul. There's something going on here with this choice that does not seem choice. And somehow, even though that they're worthless men, there's something going on here. They're completely wrong, no doubt, but they also are kind of half right in their assessment. First, how they're completely wrong. Well, they're worthless. They're worthless men. You might remember from the beginning of Samuel, that Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were also described as worthless men. And immediately after, it qualifies it by saying, they did not know the Lord. So these are prophets to be that don't know God. And then in Deuteronomy 13:13, it reads that certain worthless fellows, the same Hebrew phrase, have gone out among you and drawn away the inhabitants of their cities, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which you have not known. So these are unrighteous, unrepentant people that are also called wicked, unrighteous, and scoundrels. These are not covenant folks, but they're still living amongst the covenant people. So the worthless men in our passage, unrighteous, unredeemed, second-guessing, not just the appointed earthly king, but the divine king who's doing the appointing. I know this is going to date me. It's probably about the same time as the Burger King incident. But these guys, these worthless men, remind me a little bit of the two old guys in the Muppet Show that sit up in the balcony, Statler and Waldorf. They're cynical skeptics that are taking pot shots at the show that's playing out. It's not clear, though, why they disapprove so much. Even though they're completely wrong, unrighteous, unregenerate, they're half right in their critique from Saul. There are a few blemishes that probably they're noticing. So let me take a stab at a few. They have a tainted tribal lineage, remember? This is the tribe of Benjamin, the town of Gibeah. This is a stained reputation, a bad, dark mark in the family history. He's unproven. This guy, Saul, he's nobody from nowhere with no military background. If he's done any fighting, it's probably been with his family, and that's about it. He's tall. I'm sorry for those of you that are, blessed with height, but like Don said last week, tall equals fall in the Hebrew mind. It's what the world sees as an asset, eternal perspective sees as a liability. There's potentially some maybe hinting at, a tie with the Nephilim, the half-breeds between angels and humans. More than that, he's selfish and he's rebellious. Last week, he could have seen the signs and done what his hand found him to do with the Philistines, but instead, he wants to return to the status quo. He wants to go home to the family farm, to his old life. And he's afraid. When Samuel was trying to give him a dramatic appointment and prophetic affirmations, Saul hides amongst the baggage, the outsiders, an outsider with the outsiders. So, family drama, no job experience, abnormal genetics, rebellious mind, fearful heart. These are not really kingly traits. These are all valid concerns and liabilities that if it were up to us, they would probably influence like how we're going to vote in November, right? There's some baggage going on here. It's ironic that such a valuable hesitation comes from worthless men. But as the saying goes, even a broken clock is right twice a day. So there's something here that we can learn from. But do these men and these human liabilities limit God's ability in any way? No. As we saw, the Spirit is going to do what the Spirit's going to do. So it might be easy to discard these worthless men, they don't name them, as throwaway characters in the story, but the more time I spent in this chapter, the more, unfortunately, I was able to relate with them. For most of the world, most of the time, I think we hope in crazy alternatives as our functional saviors. Things like power, pedigree, experience, education, physical attractiveness, and job performance. Regardless of religion, these are common yet misguided hopes for salvation. Things like, if I just drop 15 pounds, I'd be saved. If I get a better job or a car or a house or a spouse, then I'd finally be free. If I can just overcome my fear of failure or insecurity around other people, I'd be all good. Life would be perfect. If I can just learn enough or have enough control to make the right choices, then I'll be able to protect the ones that I love. That last one gets me a little bit. Thankfully, I think the Lord's been working on that on me for a while, but it also revealed a good litmus test for this kind of functional God-making that we do. And so let me give you an example. Let's just say I get a phone call and it's bad news. Someone died, someone got sick, someone's hurt, someone's marriage is unraveling. What's the first thing that I do? Now, in faith, on a good day, trust in God's providence. Acknowledge Jesus in the mess. Go to God. Bring it to the covenant keeper who is not surprised, who has the power to deal with it, and who's already on the scene. He is and always has been in control. That's in faith. But what do I do oftentimes in function? Well, the sky is falling. And what do? I need to phone a friend. I don't go to God. I go to anybody else. Share the news with somebody else because misery loves company. Like Jabesh Gilead, send out messengers to anybody that will listen looking for emotional support. Now, this might seem like a harmless, decision, but I think it's telling that sometimes in moments like this, when I receive bad news, I don't go to God first. Whose job is it to save? Functionally, I guess I'm looking to myself, and I know that I don't have what it takes. I make a terrible God. I don't see the moment through a divine redemptive lens, and that causes me to freak out. I'm out of control, so I seek comfort from others who have no more control than I do. In other words, I react as if God isn't functionally there and seek a lesser savior elsewhere. I'm more like the worthless men in that situation than I'd like to admit. I'm like Saul. I need a more powerful king, one who can save. So how can this man save us? Going back to that question. I think this passage shows us that this man can't. No man can. Not Saul, not Nahash, not even God's people united as one, which seems like a good thing. There's only one hero in this passage, only one true king, and Saul knows that it's not him. Verse 13, he says, "Today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel." Now there is a subtle soteriological thread throughout our passage that shows up 4 times. The first time is when the guys say, "How can this guy save us? How can this man save us?" The next time is in verse 3 when it says, "Give us 7 days. If there's no one to save us, we will give ourselves up to you." It's this word, yashah, meaning to save. And then the third time in verse 9, it says, "Tomorrow by the time the sun is hot, you will have salvation." And then finally at the end, Saul says, "Today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel." So even though it seems like all we have in chapter 11 are bad examples of salvation or the wrong kind of salvation, God is showing us that something or someone good in this passage that still is true today as it was back then. The Spirit saves the day. No sooner does Israel claim victory than some finger pointers immediately start looking to bring those worthless men, those naysayers, those haters to justice. And Saul, in perhaps his most humble act, offers mercy to those who had committed sedition. I believe that Saul realized that of all of those doubters, those naysayers, and those haters, he might have been the worst. He doubted his appointment to king just as much, if not more, than the next worthless man. I think he truly meant it when he claimed, "Today the Lord has worked out salvation in Israel." He knew that he had done nothing on his own. He had been a puppet used by the Spirit of God. The true king had saved the day. God is the only hero in this story. The true king saves. The earthly kings serve at his discretion. It's like God was saying, if you want a job done right, you got to do it yourself. So this description and activity of Saul in chapters 10 and 11 are showing that he brings nothing to the table except for liability. Chapter 11 isn't included to show Saul's progression, his initiation from a chump to a champion. The account is of Israel's victory over the Ammonites. It's supposed to show that God's supremacy over the serpent and his ability to yet again deliver his people in the face of insurmountable odds. So the question we're left wondering at the end of this is, what kind of king will Saul be without the Spirit of God calling the shots? Who is Saul apart from God? The epiphany for me at the end of this chapter is that at the end of the day, we're all worthless men and women. You don't get a pass, sorry. We make for terrible kings when someone hands us a crown and expects us to lead. We need a true king to truly save us. We are all from a disgraced lineage. The line of Adam, the people of the fall. We're from a busted family tree. We are unproven and unworthy. Our sin has corrupted our entire being down to our DNA. And even when God is clear in his call, we are disobedient in our response. We resist. We want to just go back to life before God showed up. And we're afraid. We need more than just a man wearing a crown. We need a king who is mighty to save. Now, in the Old Testament, the Spirit of the Lord, Yahweh, or the Spirit of God, Elohim, would come and go for these special missions. It was a temporary presence for a short-term assignment. These brief rescue missions of deliverance would always be awesome, but short-lived, leaving something wanting for a greater salvation, something more permanent. What would a king look like? who had the Spirit of Yahweh, but the Spirit didn't leave. The Spirit remained. The Spirit abided. And then the Spirit passed salvation onto all the people of the kingdom. Worthiness to worthless men. In Matthew 1:21, we read that she will bear a son, and you, Joseph, shall call his name Jesus, or Yeshua. Remember, Yasha. This is the Greek form of the Aramaic name Yasha, for he will save his people from their sins. And then in Acts 4:12, it says, there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. And then Jesus says it himself. In John 15, he says, abide in me, remain in me, and I in you. As a branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is who bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Worthless. We need a king who can save to make us worthy. Apart from Savior King, we're all worthless men looking for a knockoff, cheap salvation. Like Saul, they also questioned Jesus' lineage. Isn't this Joseph and Mary's son, the oopsie baby? How could this be the one? How could this be Messiah? Now, what they couldn't know, what they couldn't see is that his lineage was royal and divine. He went all the way back to the beginning. Pure blood, noble blood. And like Saul, they thought that Jesus was uneducated and illegitimate, but he was the Logos. He was the Word of God himself. They saw him as a heretic and a blasphemer, but he said, I do only what I see my Father do. He actually didn't resist. He responded perfectly. And like Saul, he led his men into the climactic battle, but when they all scattered, he remained. He died for them. And like Saul, when he could have rightly appealed to revenge, Jesus said, forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they're doing. This is a king who gives and doesn't take. This is a king who saves. He was even there in this story with Saul for a brief mission, but he would reveal himself finally, totally, and as forever salvation at the cross. Let's pray. God, your word is so good. It's so amazing to look back at this one story and see echoes from Judges and Genesis and seeing like somehow ties to your cross. Your word is so good. And it shows that you are the only true king. Even in this passage, it was a short-term salvation. The people were saved, yes, but their hearts were still bent away from you. Some of them wanted a king like the nations, and that didn't change. Some of them wanted to keep their physical vision, and they did, but they still didn't see you clearly. Some of them wanted to be delivered from their fear, and they were for a day. But what they needed, what we need, is for a salvation that doesn't come and go, a salvation that remains, that we can abide in, and that would abide and live in us. And so we thank you for Jesus Christ, the answer to that prayer, the answer to that need, the true Savior King. We thank you for your word. We thank you that it is good news and that it lifts up our hearts. Please help us to respond and worship the King. In your name we pray. Amen.